From inside a federal prison, Jeffrey Epstein's most trusted accomplice made a chilling claim. Ghislaine Maxwell says she holds a secret document detailing Meghan Markle's pre-royal life of adult games, and the bombshell hidden inside is about to shatter the Duchess's carefully curated world forever. In the cold, sterile silence of a federal prison, a place devoid of hope and glamour, Ghislaine Maxwell finally decided to burn down the world she once helped build. The disgraced socialite, now known only by her inmate number, had spent years shrouded in silence, a living ghost haunting the edges of one of history's most depraved scandals. But the silence was about to be shattered by a chilling whisper, a name the world never expected to hear from her lips. It wasn't a titan of finance or a world leader. From the concrete corridors of her confinement in Tallahassee, a poisoned dart was fired, aimed directly at the sun-drenched hills of Montecito, California. The target was Meghan Markle. The bombshell dropped with the force of a tectonic event. Maxwell, serving a 20-year sentence for her horrific crimes as Jeffrey Epstein's chief accomplice, was ready to talk. But this wasn't a confession. It was an execution. Insiders close to her legal team began leaking tantalizing and terrifying details. Maxwell claimed to possess a secret document, a file from Markle's pre-royal life that painted a portrait so dark, so utterly contradictory to the Duchess's curated image of virtuous victimhood that it threatened to unravel everything she had become. The carefully constructed facade of Hollywood's royal saint was about to be torn to shreds. This was not just idle gossip from a desperate inmate, it was a declaration of war from the world's most infamous female prisoner. The document, sources claimed, was a dossier of depravities, a chronicle of Markle's ruthless ambition and her alleged willingness to navigate the shadowy, transactional world of Tinseltown long before she ever met a prince. It promised to expose the dark truth behind the actress who had captured the world's heart, recasting her not as a fairy tale princess, but as a cunning player who knew the rules of a very dangerous game. The stage was set for a scandal that would make the petty squabbles of the royal family look like a children's tea party. A storm was gathering, fueled by the word of a convicted monster who held the keys to a kingdom of secrets. At its center was a single explosive question. What did Ghislaine Maxwell really know about the Duchess of Sussex? The world was about to find out, and the fallout, like a contagion, would spread from the prison cell to the palace, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. The rumor of the document spread like a digital contagion, passed in hushed tones through the darkest corners of the internet before exploding into the mainstream. This wasn't a standard Hollywood resume, filled with acting credits and charity appearances. Insiders who claimed to be briefed on its contents described it with a chilling, almost biblical term, a CV of depravities. It was said to be a file that detailed a side of Meghan Markle's ruthless ambition that was a universe away from the wholesome, empathetic image she had so carefully projected to the world. The document was allegedly filled with keywords that made even the most hardened tabloid journalists gasp. Phrases like private role-play and adult-themed scenarios hinted at a secret life lived far from the public eye. It spoke of exclusive Hollywood circles that operated beyond the glare of the red carpet, inner sanctums where power, ambition, and desire mixed into a toxic cocktail. But the most tantalizing and terrifying phrase, whispered by sources, was playing the adult game. The term was a masterpiece of sinister ambiguity, a loaded statement that allowed the public's imagination to run wild with the darkest possible interpretations. Was it a euphemism for high-class escorting? Did it refer to private parties for Hollywood's elite, where fantasies were played out for powerful men? Or was it something even more disturbing, a reference to her role in a world of manipulation and compromise? The speculation was rampant and vicious. But this wasn't a baseless allegation from an anonymous online troll. This claim originated from the very heart of the Epstein network, from Ghislaine Maxwell, a woman who knew precisely how a world built on transactional relationships and hidden appetites operated. She was the architect of that world. This alleged document was the smoking gun, the potential physical proof of a past Meghan had spent years methodically trying to bury beneath a mountain of philanthropy and royal protocol. Its very existence, even as a rumor, was a ticking time bomb placed directly under the foundations of her new life. It was a threat not just to her image, but to the entire carefully constructed narrative of her escape from victimhood. For if the CV was real, it suggested she was never a victim at all, but a willing and masterful player in a game far more dangerous than she ever let on. While whispers of Maxwell's bombshell echoed through the dark corridors of the media, Meghan Markle's public life continued with a terrifyingly polished perfection. From her sprawling Montecito estate, a fortress of curated serenity, she projected an image of untouchable, serene empowerment. Her new lifestyle brand, the American Riviera Orchard, was a masterclass in perception management. The brand's aesthetic was a symphony of soft pastels, artisanal jams, and scented candles, a carefully constructed world of wholesome, aspirational luxury. Her Instagram feed was a pristine gallery of high-minded charity work, empowering quotes, and sun-kissed family moments that screamed domestic bliss. She was the Duchess of Wellness, the global philanthropist, the independent woman who had bravely escaped the suffocating, archaic confines of the British monarchy. This was the narrative she had meticulously built, brick by brick, since her dramatic and explosive exit from royal life. But the chronicler of calamity knows that the brightest, most immaculate facades often hide the darkest, most rotted secrets. Every perfectly filtered photo, every podcast episode on mental well-being and the importance of speaking your truth now stood in stark, brutal contrast to the sordid allegations bubbling up from Maxwell's prison cell. The juxtaposition was a punch to the gut. The purveyor of artisanal jams on one side and the woman accused of playing the adult game on the other. Her entire brand, her entire post-royal identity, was built on a foundation of supposed authenticity and victimhood. But Maxwell's claims threatened to expose it all as a grand, calculated lie. The perfect life in Montecito was no longer a fortress protecting her from the cruel world. It was becoming a gilded cage, and the walls, once adorned with success and praise, were now beginning to feel like they were closing in, trapping her with the very past she thought she had outrun. As the scandal erupted with the force of a volcanic explosion, the world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable counterstrike. A swift, furious denial, a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for defamation. A carefully worded statement from a high-priced crisis PR firm denouncing the claims as baseless and cruel. But from the sprawling Sussex compound in Montecito, there was only a deafening, calculated, and deeply unsettling silence. The usual flurry of activity from their media team, a machine typically hyper-responsive to the slightest criticism, ground to a halt. Meghan's social media accounts, which normally served as a platform for her latest ventures and virtuous causes, offered no acknowledgement of the raging storm. It was as if the scandal simply wasn't happening. But in the brutal court of public opinion, this silence was not interpreted as dignified restraint or strategic patience. It was seen as damning. Critics, supporters, and neutral observers alike began to read between the lines, and a chilling narrative began to write itself. She wasn't responding because she couldn't. Every passing hour of silence was another gallon of gasoline poured onto the fire, allowing the allegations to metastasize from a fringe online rumor into a credible, mainstream threat. Her silence became the story. Gossip columns dissected it with forensic precision. Social media users turned it into a torrent of brutal memes. Seasoned royal watchers who had seen every trick in the palace playbook interpreted it as a clear sign of utter panic. While her team of advisors likely counseled her to wait for the storm to pass, they fundamentally misjudged the nature of this particular tempest. This wasn't a fleeting squall that could be weathered. It was a Category 5 hurricane, powered by the testimony of one of the most infamous and knowledgeable criminals in modern history. Meghan's signature strategy of rising above the fray, of positioning herself as the untouchable victim, was failing spectacularly. In this high-stakes game of perception, silence wasn't golden. It was a confession. It was an admission that there was something to hide, a dark truth so damaging that even a denial was too risky. Just when it seemed the crisis couldn't escalate further, the scandal moved from the gossipy pages of tabloids to the cold, hard reality of legal filings. The legal vultures began to circle. Virginia Giuffre's attorneys, long engaged in a brutal, drawn-out battle to expose the full extent of Epstein's monstrous network, saw a golden opportunity. In a move that sent shockwaves through the media, they publicly stated that Meghan Markle was now a person of interest, someone whose testimony could be relevant and material to their ongoing cases. This wasn't just a veiled threat, it was a devastatingly strategic legal maneuver. They went further, dropping a bombshell claim that Meghan knew Virginia personally, suggesting they weren't just casual acquaintances who had crossed paths at a party. This single allegation instantly transformed the Duchess from a peripheral celebrity name into a potential key witness in the trial of the century. The prospect of Meghan Markle being deposed, of being forced to sit in a sterile room and answer pointed questions under oath about her knowledge of Prince Andrew, Jeffrey Epstein, and their shadowy inner circle, was a public relations nightmare of epic proportions. Her name began appearing in official court documents, forever linking her to the sordid case in the unerasable ink of legal history. The pressure mounted, opening a terrifying second front in the war against her reputation. Even if she was never formally called to the stand, the damage was done. The mere suggestion that she held crucial, hidden information, that she may have had first-hand knowledge of the horrific events that transpired, was enough to cement the public's deepest suspicions. The vultures were no longer just circling overhead, they were beginning to descend, for they could smell blood in the water. Just as the legal pressure on Meghan Markle intensified to a fever pitch, a U.S. judge delivered a ruling that sent conspiracy theorists into an absolute frenzy. In a stunning decision, the court denied the request to release Jeffrey Epstein's grand jury transcripts, citing the legal necessity to protect the privacy and safety of the victims. On the surface, it was a perfectly reasonable and legally sound decision. But in the charged, paranoid context of the burgeoning Markle scandal, it looked like a blatant, top-down cover-up. The question screamed from every corner of the internet. Why seal the files if there was truly nothing to hide? The ruling created a massive information vacuum, and the public, armed with speculation and suspicion, rushed in to fill it with the darkest possible theories. The sealed documents were instantly transformed into a mythical treasure chest of secrets, a Pandora's box with Meghan's name rumored to be scattered throughout its pages. Social media threads exploded with elaborate theories, with many convinced that a powerful, shadowy establishment, perhaps even the British royal family itself, was working behind the scenes to protect her, and by extension, the already disgraced Prince Andrew. The court's attempt to maintain judicial order had the exact opposite effect. It poured gasoline on the fire of conspiracy. It fueled the growing narrative that powerful people had something catastrophic to lose if the full truth ever saw the light of day. The sealed files became another critical piece of the puzzle, a potent symbol of the secrets being kept from an outraged public. For Meghan, this was a devastating blow. The narrative was no longer just about her alleged past actions. It was now about her potential involvement in a wide-ranging, high-level conspiracy to conceal the truth. She was no longer just an actress with a questionable past. She was now a potential conspirator in the crime of the century. As the layers of the scandal were peeled back, a devastating new narrative emerged. This wasn't just about guilt by association. It was about proximity. Court documents and a steady drip of insider leaks began to paint a deeply unsettling picture of Meghan Markle. Not as a distant acquaintance of the Epstein circle, but as a close companion to key players at critical and damning times. This carefully chosen phrase, loaded with legal and social implication, was a tactical nuclear strike against her reputation. It implied a level of intimacy, familiarity, and trust that was horrifying to contemplate. A close companion isn't just someone you meet at a star-studded gala. They are someone who is present for private moments, who overhears unguarded conversations, who witnesses the things that are never meant for public consumption. This alleged proximity placed her in the room where secrets were shared, deals were brokered, and unspeakable acts were planned. Suddenly, her entire history of interactions with figures like the disgraced Prince Andrew were re-examined under a harsh, unforgiving new light. Every photograph, every society event, was now seen as a potential piece of a much darker puzzle. The central question shifted from "what did she do?" to the more sinister, "what did she know?" Was she a naive, star-struck actress caught in a depraved world she couldn't possibly understand? Or was she a willing participant, an ambitious social climber who knew exactly whose company she was keeping and what the price of that proximity was? The narrative of her being a close companion was so devastating because it strongly suggested knowledge, if not outright complicity. It explained, with chilling clarity, why Virginia Giuffre's legal teams were so eager to depose her. She wasn't just another name on a long list of potential witnesses. She was a potential eyewitness to one of history's darkest and most secretive high society scandals. Inevitably, the scandal's toxic tendrils began to wrap themselves around the already disgraced and exiled figure of Prince Andrew, the Duke of York. His catastrophic connection to Jeffrey Epstein was a deep, festering wound on the British monarchy, one they had desperately tried to cauterize and conceal. But Meghan's alleged proximity to their sordid circle threatened to rip that wound wide open, exposing the rot to the world once more. The timing couldn't have been more devastating for the royal family. They were still reeling from Andrew's downfall, frantically trying to distance the institution from his stench of depravity. Now, in a twist of cruel irony, the wife of their estranged runaway prince was being dragged into the very same vortex of filth. Palace insiders were reportedly in a state of absolute panic. Meghan's connection, however tenuous or unproven, created a direct, unbreakable link between the shiny new world of the Sussexes in California and the decaying, old-world rot of Andrew's past. It magnified the stakes exponentially. This was no longer just a Hollywood scandal about a former actress. It had metastasized into a full-blown royal crisis. Every headline that mentioned Meghan, Ghislaine, and Epstein now implicitly mentioned the British crown. The royal family's carefully managed image, already battered and bruised, was once again being tarnished by a catastrophic association. And this time, the blow was coming from the very person who had publicly accused them of being a toxic, unfeeling institution she needed to escape. It was a brutal, devastating twist of fate. The woman who fled the palace, claiming its walls were a prison, was now dragging its darkest, most shameful secrets back out into the light, chaining the monarchy once again to the monstrous legacy of Jeffrey Epstein. As the allegations mounted and the crisis reached a fever pitch, Meghan's supporters mobilized, launching a fierce and coordinated defense. They branded the entire affair a slanderous smear campaign, a vicious, coordinated attack meticulously designed to destroy the Duchess's reputation. They argued that the timing was deeply suspicious, coming just as she was launching her new lifestyle brand, a project that was meant to be her crowning post-royal achievement. To her loyal defenders, this was a classic tactic, a hit job orchestrated by the ruthless British tabloids and the shadowy royal establishment, all designed to punish her for daring to leave the fold and speak her truth. They immediately attacked the source, pointing to Ghislaine Maxwell's compromised credibility and insisting that the word of a convicted sex trafficker was utterly worthless. Hashtags defending Meghan began to trend on social media as a digital army of supporters went to war. Articles were written decrying the baseless and cruel nature of the claims, but their passionate defense struggled to gain any real traction against the sheer gravitational weight of Maxwell's infamy. The problem was the source. While Ghislaine Maxwell was indeed a convicted criminal and a monster of historic proportions, she was also an undeniable, unimpeachable insider. Her knowledge of Epstein's depraved world was unparalleled. She knew where all the bodies were buried because she had helped dig the graves. This wasn't a random blogger or a disgruntled ex-employee making things up for clicks. This was the devil's right-hand woman pointing a damning finger from the depths of her prison cell. As a result, the desperate cry of smear campaign began to sound less like a robust defense and more like a pathetic, hopeless plea. The public was utterly captivated by the source of the accusation, and in this brutal battle of perception, the word of a caged monster carried infinitely more weight than the curated silence of a distant duchess. Of all the sordid, jaw-dropping details rumored to be contained within Ghislaine Maxwell's secret document, one chilling phrase stood out. It immediately captured the public's imagination and became the black heart of the entire scandal: playing the adult game. Its brilliance was in its wicked ambiguity. The phrase was just scandalous enough to become an instant headline, yet just vague enough to be almost impossible to deny. It became a blank, dark canvas onto which the public could project its most lurid and damning assumptions about the Duchess. Did it mean she was involved in the world of high-class escorting, trading her company for access and advancement? Did it refer to her participation in elaborate, decadent role-playing scenarios for the jaded elites of Hollywood, a world where fantasy and reality blurred into a horrifying spectacle? Or did it simply mean she was a cold, calculating master of social manipulation, using her charm and beauty as weapons to climb the slippery ladder of power? The internet exploded with feverish speculation. Online forums and social media threads dissected the three-word phrase with an obsessive, almost religious fervor. It was the perfect narrative weapon, a public relations masterstroke allegedly conceived by Maxwell herself from the confines of her cell. It created a thick, suffocating cloud of suspicion that was impossible for Meghan's team to dispel. How could they possibly deny something so maddeningly undefined? To address it directly would be to give the vile accusation legitimacy, but to ignore it was to let the world assume the absolute worst. And so the phrase became a powerful, inescapable meme, a dark shorthand for the unknown, sordid past she was now accused of hiding. The Duchess of Sussex, the self-styled queen of controlling her own narrative, was now haunted by a three-word ghost she simply could not fight. The American Riviera orchard was meant to be Meghan's triumphant rebranding, the glittering cornerstone of her post-royal global empire. But Ghislaine Maxwell's horrific allegations turned it into a public monument to her perceived hypocrisy. The contrast between the brand's pristine, wholesome image and the sordid, ugly rumors was jarring and absolutely inescapable. The central question became a toxic meme. How could the public buy into a narrative of empowerment and authenticity from a woman now inextricably associated with secret documents and whispers of playing adult games? Every new product launch, every carefully curated Instagram post became an opportunity for brutal public mockery. Pictures of her expensive scented candles were juxtaposed online with headlines about sealed court files. Images of her artisanal jams were mercilessly memed alongside quotes from Virginia Giuffre's lawyers. The brand, which was intended to be her shield against criticism, a testament to her independence and good taste, had instead become a primary target. Skeptics began to question the entire enterprise, viewing it not as a genuine passion project born of her unique talents, but as a cynical, high-stakes cash grab built on a fraudulent public persona. The scandal didn't just tarnish her personal reputation, it directly threatened her financial future. In the hyper-competitive world of celebrity lifestyle branding, perception is everything. Once the public believes the messenger is hiding a dark, unforgivable secret, the message itself, no matter how beautifully packaged or aspirational, becomes toxic. The American Riviera orchard, her Californian dream, was now under siege, and its very foundations were cracking under the unbearable pressure of the scandal. The scandal acted like a corrosive acid, forcing a complete and brutal re-examination of Meghan's entire Hollywood history. Her carefully crafted origin story, the journey of a struggling but principled actress who finally achieved her dream through sheer talent and perseverance, was no longer seen as an inspiring tale. It was now viewed as a potential roadmap of moral compromise. The exclusive circles she moved in, the lavish parties she attended, the powerful people she networked with every step of her ascent was now viewed through a dark lens of suspicion. The central question became poisonous. Was she just another ambitious actress trying to make it, or was her rise to fame facilitated by a chilling willingness to navigate the darker, transactional side of the industry? Epstein and Maxwell's evil network thrived in the gray areas of Tinseltown, in the spaces where power, fame, and money intersected with the most depraved of hidden desires. The allegations suggested that Meghan was not just merely aware of this world, but that she may have been a shrewd and willing player within it. Her acting credits, once a source of professional pride, now seemed to tell a different, more sinister story. Her breakout role in the popular Showtime Suits Times was scrutinized for any hint of foreshadowing, any parallel between her on-screen character and her off-screen ambitions. The public narrative shifted seismically. This was no longer a fairy tale romance between an American actress and a British prince. It had become a much darker story, the tale of a woman who allegedly understood the currency of secrets and power long before she ever set foot inside a palace. Her Hollywood past, once her greatest asset, was now her greatest liability, a trail of damning breadcrumbs that seemed to lead directly into the black heart of the scandal. The scandal immediately drew clear and brutal battle lines across the digital landscape. On one side stood the Sussex Squad, Meghan's fiercely loyal and highly organized fan base. They viewed her as a perpetual victim, a saintly martyr, being subjected to a relentless, racially motivated campaign of hate. They defended her with unwavering, almost religious passion, launching vicious attacks on journalists, critics, and anyone who dared to question the Duchess. To them, Ghislaine Maxwell's claims were simply the latest, most vile chapter in a long and tragic history of persecution, cooked up by her enemies to destroy her. On the other side was a rapidly growing army of skeptics. This was a diverse coalition of royal traditionalists, avid tabloid readers, and meticulous online sleuths who had long been suspicious of Meghan's motives and her version of events. They saw the Maxwell allegations as the ultimate, glorious vindication, the long-awaited proof that their deep-seated doubts were justified all along. These two factions clashed in a brutal, no-holds-barred online war, turning every comment section and social media platform into a toxic, scorched earth battlefield. The public discourse was instantly stripped of all reason and nuance. In this polarized war, Meghan Markle could only be one of two things: a saintly, persecuted martyr or a manipulative, diabolical demon. This extreme polarization was an absolute disaster for her public image. While the unconditional support of her fans was undoubtedly a comfort, the sheer ferocity of their defense often alienated moderate, undecided observers, pushing them toward the camp of the skeptics. The Duchess was no longer a public figure to be analyzed or debated. She had become a symbol, a human lightning rod for the raging culture wars, and the furious debate over her character was quickly becoming far more important than the actual truth of the allegations themselves. As the scandal raged on with no end in sight, news outlets began publishing explosive excerpts from what they ominously called the Ghislaine tapes, leaked transcripts of her jailhouse interviews with her legal team and a handful of trusted journalists. These documents provided a chilling, unprecedented glimpse into the cold, calculating mind of a master manipulator. In the transcripts, Maxwell spoke at length and with a disturbing lack of emotion about her twisted relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, her monstrous media baron father, Robert Maxwell, and her chillingly detached views on the victims she helped procure. But laced throughout her monologues were cryptic, threatening references to her files and the legions of powerful people whose darkest secrets she kept locked away. While she was careful not to mention Meghan Markle by name, she would drop tantalizing, poisonous hints about a certain ambitious Hollywood actress who knew exactly how to get ahead. These carefully worded, legally ambiguous statements were designed for maximum psychological impact. They allowed her to pour fuel on the raging fire without opening herself up to further legal action. The tapes were a brutal form of psychological warfare, orchestrated by a tactical genius from behind bars. She was demonstrating her enduring power, sending a clear message to the world that even in a prison jumpsuit, she could still make kings, presidents, and duchesses tremble with fear. Each new transcript release became a major media event, sending journalists and online sleuths scrambling to decipher her coded language and connect the dots. For Meghan, these tapes were a form of slow-motion torture, a steady, the relentless drip of innuendo and suspicion that kept the scandal alive and her name forever bound to the horrors of the Epstein-Maxwell machine. In a bizarre, almost surreal, and catastrophically ill-timed public appearance amidst the raging fire of the scandal, Meghan Markle gave a keynote speech at a wellness summit. There, she championed a psychological concept she breathlessly presented as a profound personal insight: the power of yet. She spoke with forced sincerity about the importance of optimism and the unwavering belief that any and all challenges could be overcome with a relentlessly positive mindset. But her profound wisdom was quickly exposed for what it was. The phrase, which she had delivered as if it were a divine revelation, was almost immediately revealed to have been lifted directly from a decade-old TED Talk by a Stanford psychologist named Carol Dweck. The irony was as brutal as it was humiliating. At the very moment her reputation was being systematically dismantled by horrific allegations of a sordid, hidden past, the Duchess was on stage, clumsily plagiarizing shallow, corporate-friendly self-help slogans. The phrase, "the power of yet," became an instant merciless meme, a global symbol of her perceived phoniness and her complete and utter detachment from the gravity of her situation. Critics savaged her with glee, pointing out the obscene disconnect. While she was luxuriating in bland, borrowed optimism, Ghislaine Maxwell's victims were forever gripped by the tyranny of now. The speech was a catastrophic, unforced error, making her appear not just hopelessly out of touch, but profoundly foolish. It reinforced the rapidly growing narrative that her entire public persona was a hollow, fragile construction, built from a patchwork of borrowed ideas and curated platitudes. At the precise moment when she needed to project strength, defiance, and above all, authenticity, she delivered a performance that was derivative, weak, and painfully transparent. Slowly but surely, the scandal began to take a tangible, devastating toll. This was no longer just a war of words fought in the abstract realm of social media. The damage began to manifest in the real world, hitting Meghan's reputation, her business ventures, and her personal relationships. Major brand partnerships that were once in the pipeline were reportedly stalled, then quietly abandoned as powerful corporations grew wary of being publicly associated with the toxic controversy. The initial breathless buzz around her American Riviera orchard brand began to fade, replaced by a dark and morbid curiosity from the public. The financial cost of her silence and the ever-growing scandal was mounting at an alarming rate. Furthermore, the crisis placed an immense, almost unbearable strain on her relationship with Prince Harry and what little remained of their connections to the royal family. Every new, sordid headline was a fresh source of profound embarrassment for the crown, widening the already vast and seemingly unbridgeable chasm between the Sussexes and the rest of the family in London. The carefully crafted dream of a glamorous, independent, and influential life in California was rapidly turning into a waking nightmare of potential litigation and relentless public scorn. This was the true cost of the secrets she was accused of keeping. The past, which she had tried so desperately to outrun and redefine, was not just catching up to her, it was threatening to burn down everything she had so painstakingly built in the present. The glamorous life of a global influencer, a wellness guru, and a respected philanthropist that she had envisioned for herself was being rapidly replaced by the grim, inescapable reality of a woman trapped in the center of a catastrophic scandal that she could no longer control. The entire world now seemed to be locked in a tense, suffocating waiting game. Everyone, from palace insiders to anonymous online sleuths, was waiting for the other shoe to drop with a catastrophic thud. Would the alleged secret document, the CV of depravities, ever actually surface? Would a major media outlet be brave or reckless enough to publish its contents and face the inevitable legal firestorm? Would Meghan Markle finally break her deafening silence and confront the horrific allegations head-on? Or would another key witness, emboldened by Maxwell, come forward with irrefutable, damning proof? The suspense was palpable, a thick fog of anticipation that hung over the global news cycle. Every day brought a fresh wave of feverish speculation, new theories, and supposed insider leaks, but no definitive, concrete answers. This agonizing state of limbo was, in itself, a uniquely cruel form of psychological torture for the Duchess. The complete absence of a resolution meant that the scandal could not die down. It festered in the public consciousness like an untreated wound, an electrifying story without an ending. Her name was now permanently, toxically attached to those of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, an unholy trinity of scandal that would follow her for the rest of her life, regardless of the ultimate outcome. The media, a ravenous beast that requires constant feeding to survive, was perfectly content to let the story simmer indefinitely. They understood a fundamental truth. The mystery was far more compelling and far more profitable than any potential truth. For Meghan, there was no escape. She was trapped in the center of the narrative, a central character in a horrifying global drama where she had completely and irrevocably lost all control of the script. Ultimately, the terrifying credibility of the entire scandal hinged on one single, caged individual, Ghislaine Maxwell. And that was precisely what made it so terrifyingly potent. She wasn't a distant accuser recycling secondhand gossip. She was the ultimate insider, the high priestess of Epstein's depraved cult. She had meticulously organized the decadent parties, she had managed the lavish homes that served as hunting grounds, and she had personally procured the victims. She knew the names, the dates, the locations, and the secret appetites of the world's most powerful men. She understood, with intimate, first-hand knowledge, the intricate web of power, blackmail, and silence that protected Jeffrey Epstein for decades. Her criminal conviction, paradoxically, gave her a strange and powerful form of authority. While her character was utterly and irrevocably destroyed in the eyes of the world, her knowledge was undisputed. When Ghislaine Maxwell spoke, even from a prison phone, people had to listen because she was one of the only people on Earth who truly knew what happened behind the closed doors of those mansions in Manhattan and Palm Beach, and on that private island in the Caribbean. This was why her alleged focus on Meghan Markle was so utterly devastating. If she claimed to have a secret document, it was grimly plausible that she did. If she hinted at a dark, transactional past, it was grimly plausible that one existed. Ghislaine Maxwell was a convicted liar and a monster of almost unimaginable evil, but she was also the gatekeeper to some of the world's most dangerous and explosive secrets. Her word, though morally bankrupt and spoken with venom, held the undeniable power to ruin reputations from 1,000 miles away, proving once and for all that even a caged monster can still bite. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, a subtle but significant shift began to occur in the unforgiving court of public opinion. The initial breathless shock of the allegations slowly gave way to a grudging, cynical acceptance that where there was this much billowing smoke, there might very well be a raging fire. The potent combination of Ghislaine Maxwell's damning claims, the mounting legal pressure, the mystery of the sealed court files, and Meghan's own deafening silence created a critical mass of suspicion that became too heavy to ignore. It became increasingly difficult for even her most ardent and loyal supporters to dismiss every single accusation as a mere conspiracy, a coordinated lie. Casual observers, who were once indifferent to the palace dramas, started to pay close, fascinated attention. The narrative had reached a crucial, irreversible tipping point. The Duchess of Sussex was no longer being automatically given the benefit of the doubt. The carefully cultivated public perception of her as a strong, independent, and victimized woman was being rapidly replaced by a far more complex and deeply unsettling image. The image of a woman with a dark, hidden past, a masterful manipulator whose carefully constructed world was beginning to visibly crumble under the weight of her own alleged secrets. This seismic shift was irreversible. Even if the document never materialized, and even if the allegations were never definitively proven in a court of law, the poisonous seed of doubt had been successfully planted in the public mind. Her image was now fractured, perhaps permanently. The scandal had successfully and brutally redefined her, not by proving her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, but by making the entire world question her innocence. The scandal's devastating impact began to ripple outwards, a toxic shockwave that affected not just Meghan and the besieged royals, but the broader celebrity culture as a whole. The affair served as a stark, brutal reminder of the dark, festering underbelly of Hollywood and the hidden, soul-crushing compromises that can pave the road to fame. A palpable sense of fear crept through the elite circles of Tinseltown. Other celebrities who had once casually brushed shoulders with the Epstein-Maxwell circle, attending their parties and flying on their private jets, now grew deeply nervous, wondering in terror if their names might be the next to be whispered from Maxwell's prison cell. The affair exposed, with blinding clarity, the inherent fragility of the modern celebrity brand. It demonstrated how years, even decades, of careful, meticulous image cultivation could be undone in an instant by a single, well-placed accusation from a credible, knowledgeable source. It was a terrifying lesson in the precariousness of fame. The scandal also highlighted the public's voracious, almost insatiable appetite for salacious gossip, particularly when it involves the irresistible intersection of royalty, celebrity, and high-level crime. The Meghan Maxwell saga transcended a simple news story and became a global obsession, a real-life soap opera that was far more compelling and shocking than any scripted drama. It was a grim cautionary tale for the ages, a brutal lesson in how quickly a modern fairy tale can turn into a medieval horror story, and how the ghosts of one's past, no matter how deeply buried, are never truly gone. They wait, patiently, for the perfect moment to rise from the grave and demand their price. Sensing the catastrophic, irreversible shift in public perception, Meghan's embattled team attempted a desperate and clumsy PR pivot. Since they were unable to address the allegations directly without giving them even more oxygen, they went on a sudden, frantic offensive in other, safer areas. In a matter of days, they flooded the media with a torrent of positive stories about her charity work, released a series of professionally shot new photos of her children, and announced a slate of ambitious, new, empowering projects for women. It was a classic, almost comically transparent look-over-here strategy, a desperate attempt to distract the bloodthirsty public with a blinding barrage of positive, wholesome content. They were frantically trying to change the conversation from Ghislaine Maxwell's depravities to Meghan Markle's philanthropy. But the entire effort felt hollow, calculated, and painfully transparent. The public was no longer interested in her latest jam recipe or her recycled thoughts on corporate wellness. They wanted answers about the secret document. The pivot failed spectacularly because it fundamentally misread the public mood. People didn't want distraction. They wanted resolution. They wanted the truth. By stubbornly ignoring the raging elephant in the room, her team only made it look bigger, more threatening, and more real. The harder they tried to project an image of calm, business-as-usual normalcy and control, the more panicked, desperate, and completely out of control they appeared to the watching world. The once feared Sussex PR machine was sputtering and failing, its gears hopelessly jammed by a scandal far too big and far too dark to spin. A palpable tension descended upon the media landscape. The air grew heavy with anticipation. It felt as though the entire, sordid saga was finally entering its brutal endgame. Whispers from sources close to Ghislaine Maxwell's legal team began to circulate, hinting that the release of the secret document was imminent. They suggested it was being held in reserve as a final, devastating chess move, a nuclear option to be deployed at the most strategic moment. Legal experts began to speculate that the document might be introduced as part of a formal motion for a reduced sentence, a last-ditch, desperate effort by Maxwell to prove her cooperation with authorities by offering up a royal sacrifice. The global media was on high alert, a pack of wolves sensing a kill. Journalists from major outlets were reportedly offering vast, life-changing sums of money for an exclusive first look at the alleged file, the mythical CV of depravities. For Meghan Markle, this was the moment of truth, the point of no return. The long, agonizing period of silent waiting was over. A direct, public confrontation with her alleged past now seemed terrifyingly unavoidable. The question was no longer times if times the bombshell would finally drop, but times when times and times how. The world watched, holding its collective breath, as the players on this international stage moved into their final positions for a showdown that promised to be one of the most sensational, explosive, and destructive celebrity clashes in modern history. The carefully constructed, picture-perfect world of Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, was on the brink of total collapse, and the fuse, lit months ago in a dark prison cell, had been lit. And then, the relentless, suffocating pressure began to show. In her rare public appearances, Meghan's famously polished and impenetrable demeanor started to visibly crack. A forced, tight smile seemed to carry the crushing weight of the world. A slight, almost imperceptible tremble in her voice during a carefully scripted speech was endlessly dissected by body language experts on cable news. The effortless, almost regal confidence that had once defined her public persona was replaced by a visible, painful strain. The world was witnessing a woman unraveling in real time, trapped under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the global media spotlight. The scandal had finally succeeded in stripping away her carefully constructed armor, exposing the raw vulnerability that lay beneath. The public no longer saw a defiant duchess or a calculating operator. They saw a woman trapped, haunted by her past, and clearly terrified of her future. This sudden, jarring humanization, paradoxically, made the scandal even more compelling. It was no longer an abstract story about rich and powerful people behaving badly. It had become a deeply personal, almost Shakespearean drama about one woman's spectacular and tragic fall from grace. Her suffering became part of the public spectacle, a grim and brutal testament to the cruel, unforgiving nature of a trial by media. The Duchess of Sussex, a woman who had built her entire brand on the concept of controlling her own narrative, was now losing the battle for her own story. And her public image, once so meticulously curated, was being rewritten before her very eyes by forces far more powerful and ruthless than she had ever imagined. The final bombshell didn't come with a bang, but with a whisper. There was no dramatic courtroom revelation, no splashy tabloid front page with screaming headlines. It came, just as it had begun, with a quiet, chilling message that cut through the noise. A highly respected Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, a man with a global reputation for meticulous research and impeccable sourcing, published a short, cryptic message on his private social media account. It simply read, "The CV is real. The source is undeniable. The game is over." The message contained no salacious details, no explicit excerpts from the document, but it didn't need to. Coming from this particular source, a man known for his caution and his refusal to engage in baseless speculation, it was a death blow. It was the definitive, devastating confirmation the world had been waiting for. In an instant, It transformed the entire scandal from the realm of sordid speculation into the cold, hard territory of accepted fact, at least in the unforgiving court of public opinion. Within minutes, the message went viral, a digital wildfire that consumed the internet. The public narrative was immediately and irrevocably set in stone. The document existed. Ghislaine Maxwell, the monster in the cell, had been telling the truth. And Meghan Markle's past was exactly as dark and compromised as the rumors had suggested. It was a masterfully executed final move, a quiet, understated confirmation that was infinitely more devastating than any loud, sensational exposé could ever have been. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a terrible, damning certainty. There was no longer any room for doubt, debate, or defense. In the scorched aftermath, there was only ruin. Meghan Markle's billion-dollar brand, her carefully polished reputation, and her meticulously constructed life of curated perfection lay in a heap of smoldering ashes. The American Riviera orchard, her Californian dream, shuttered its online store, its artisanal jams and scented candles becoming relics of a fallen empire. Her multi-million-dollar media deals were quietly and unceremoniously canceled. She retreated from public life entirely, her once strategic silence now a grim necessity of her exile. She had become a pariah, a walking symbol of deception and hidden depravity. The brutal, unforgiving scandal became her defining legacy, completely overshadowing her acting career, her historic royal marriage, and her years of passionate charity work. In the cold calculus of public memory, she was no longer the Duchess of Sussex. She was simply the woman named in the Ghislaine Maxwell files. The chronicler of calamity knows that fame is a fickle, bloodthirsty beast, and that the secrets one keeps are a debt that will always, eventually, be collected. For Meghan Markle, the price of her ambition, the terrible cost of flying too close to the sun, was a fall from grace so spectacular, so absolute, and so complete that it would serve as a dark, cautionary tale for generations to come. Her modern fairy tale had ended, not with a happily ever after, but with the cold, hard reality of a reputation burned to the ground. The game was over, and she had lost.